All right, thank you, Norm. Okay, welcome everybody. As Tim and Norm indicated, this is webinar number 4. So it is now going to cover interference part 3. This is the last of the interference rules that we're going to cover. So again, here are your presenters for tonight, Mr. Strutzel, Mr. Gordon, and myself, and you pick whichever one you think we are. As indicated in the schedule here, so this is again the last part of our interference. We'll talk about coach interference, umpire interference, and a few other things. I had originally thought about putting correctable situations on the agenda for tonight, but I think there wasn't enough time, so we're just going to cover the last part of interference, and then we're going to move correctable situations to another scheduled webinar. So look for that in upcoming webinars. So here's our agenda for tonight. We always start out with any clarifications from the last review. Then we'll go over interference part 3. We'll talk about coach interference, spectator. We're not going to cover much about spectator because most of our fields are enclosed. Umpire interference, and then oddly enough, an interfering umpire, which in some cases is not umpire interference. And then as always, we follow up with any type of Q&A. For clarifications from our last review, we had a few emails here and there, but nothing really major or significant. So for all intents and purposes, we really didn't have anything to clarify from our last review, which was batter, runner, and runner interference. So let's go ahead and transition into the last component of interference part 3. So we've already talked about interference by the batter. We've already talked about interference by the batter runner and the runner. Now we're going to be talking about interference that can occur with other participants in the game, whether if it's a coach or an umpire or even a spectator. And maybe for some of the private schools that may not be completely enclosed, there is a possibility for interference to occur there. But for the most part, for the public schools, generally, usually, normally, most of the time, those fields are going to be fully enclosed. So getting into other kinds of interference, we're really talking about, we'll start off with offensive interference. This is interference that occurs with anyone associated with the offense, whether or not they are obstructing in any way, shape, or form, impeding or hindering, or even confusing the defenders who are out on the field. In addition to that, we're also going to talk about malicious contact. Now, malicious contact is an interference violation, but it's a special kind of interference violation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress through the briefing tonight. Rule 3, we talk about coach, where the coach may physically assist a runner, which is really not prohibited. Coaches are in the coach's box. We got batters who are rounding the base, whether if it's our batter runner who's progressing from first to second, or again, generally, usually, normally, most of the time, it's really going to be that runner who's rounding third with a full head of steam, trying to score. There's another part of interference associated with the offense where they fail to vacate. You really don't see much of that, so I really didn't cover that tonight. So I don't think we need to be worried too much about that. And then again, in Rule 5, if you all remember our rule book structure, Rule 5 talks about when a ball is alive or when the ball is dead. So if we have offensive interference, we may go ahead and call time. But there are times where we're going to allow the play to continue, and we'll talk about that later on. And then there's Rule 8, which talks about when a coach physically assists a runner, and by rule, we're going to declare that runner out. And also, we're going to allow the play to continue. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in subsequent charts. So let's go ahead and start with coach's interference. So what we have for coach's interference, the coach shall not physically assist a runner during any type of playing action. If we observe, and depending upon the umpire who sees that, there are times in which you might see the plate umpire making that call. There are times in which you might see the base umpire making that call. And the difference between the two is whoever has the responsibility for the runner at the time of the coach's interference. That's the umpire that's going to be making that call. And again, per Rule 5, Article 2, when we see a coach assisting a runner, we're going to call that interference. That's going to be a delayed dead ball. We're going to allow the play to continue on, but we're going to call the runner out at the time in which he is physically assisted. So that's going to be again, a delayed dead ball. Now, you might ask, what is meant by physically assisted? So this is my interpretation of what that may mean. You know, if a coach grabs a runner as the runner is rounding third and the coach wants to hold the runner up because he may feel that the runner could potentially be put out, you know, that's a pretty good indicator that the coach is assisting the runner by halting him and preventing that out. And then converse, where the runner may be grabbing the coach, he's rounding third again, where he may think that he is going to be put out, so he may grab the coach, intentionally grab the coach to prevent him from going any farther, stopping, turning, and returning to the base. So any type of grabbing by the coach or grabbing by the runner, I think is a pretty good indicator that we have coach's interference on the play. Clearly, whether if a coach pushes or pulls a runner, that's pretty obvious, as well as grabbing, whether if it's the runner or the coach grabbing. So when you see a push or a pull, that's pretty much coach's interference, and you should be able to get that. What might be a little bit harder is when there's a collision where the coach is kind of acting as a wall. He's just standing there. He may be signaling to the runner to round, and for whatever reason, the runner may take a wider than normal wider than normal base path, or the coach may be fairly close and the coach is a wall. You know, so there's a situation where you're going to have to use some judgment as to whether you felt that the coach acting as a wall was in a physically assisted type play, and then you make the call as you see it. I don't know what to tell you. In some cases, it might be an easy call. In some cases, it may not be as easy. So use your judgment. If you think the runner gained any kind of advantage, then you might want to err on the conservative side and call coach's interference on that play. Now, we talked about in this play a delayed dead ball, and we've actually mentioned delayed dead ball in previous reviews, but just to go over to make sure, you know, the term is used when situations where we have an infraction which is not ignored, and in this case we have coach's interference where we're going to call the runner out, but we're going to allow the play to continue up to the point where all playing action has stopped. And then once all playing action has stopped, we call time, and then we do what we need to do, whether it's to award additional bases or return runners to a base. So just as a quick reminder, it's just a delay in potentially in stopping the play once all playing action has ceased. So the next couple of charts are examples. It's one play. We have a runner who is rounding third base. We have a coach who's providing the guidance that he provides to his runners. So here we have a runner who has rounded third, and we have a coach who's put his hand up saying, hey, don't think you're going to make it. You're going to need to stop here. So now we have contact between the coach and our runner who has rounded third. And here's another angle, and as you can see, the coach may be standing there, but the runner clearly is got his arms and his hands on and around the coach. And you'd like to think that this would be a fairly good indication that the runner is taking advantage of the coach's position in order to stop to prevent from being put out as the play comes into the infield. Here's another example, and again, the coach may not be actively assisting the runner, but the runner may appear to be using the coach to halt his progress and protect either his return to third base. Obviously, the coach is going to do what he can to prove, to demonstrate to the umpires who may have a question as to whether or not there's coach's interference. So in this example, he's put up his arms to indicate that, hey, I'm not interfering. I would not use that as a primary read. I might use that as a secondary read. I would probably use the read of the coach actively pushing or pulling, or the runner who is grabbing to prevent his advancement and potential put out. I'd use those reads first before I would use this type of read by the coach. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at this play and see how it developed. So you be the judge as to whether or not you thought the player gained an advantage by using the coach to hold up his advancement potentially to home. I think at the tail end of the video you saw that the ball had actually come into the infield and it was going to be fielded by our third baseman. So, for the most part, I think this would have been a good call for any type of coach's interference. Okay. So here's a case play. We have a runner on third base with one out, and our batter, B3, hits a fly ball, and we have three scenarios. Our first scenario in A, F8 is about to catch the ball. In B, is going over the fence for a home run. Or in C, it bounces off the fence and it's in play. And in each of those scenarios, R3's coach at third physically assists R3 at third base. So let's take a look. In our first scenario, F8's catch would have been the third out of the inning. So the coach's interference would be the third out. That's not right. It's about to catch. He catches it in the outfield, and then the coach interference at third would be the third out. That's incorrect. In B, if there had been two outs at the time of the catch and there was physical assistance by the coach at third, the coach at third would have been the third out, and as a result, the home run would not have counted. In the third case scenario where it hits off the fence, the ball's in play, it's a live ball, we're going to call R3 out immediately because of the coach's physical assistance. So in A and B, this is a little bit off. I'll have to correct that for the next time. But again, the focus here is if you think there's physical assistance by the coach, we're going to go ahead and call that runner out. If there are less than two outs, you allow the play to continue. If that's a third out, then you end the half inning. Again, the big point here is in all cases, the ball is going to remain live, and we're going to look for any potential plays. And then at the end of playing action, we call time and enforce the penalty. Here's another case play. B1 hits a home run out of the park. While rounding third, he trips over the base. The third base coach helps B1 to his feet. So you have to ask yourself, is this assisting the coach? Is this runner assistance? Well, again, use your judgment. Since the ball is dead and B1 is awarded 4 bases, he's allowed to score, because this type of assistance by the third base coach really is not advancing our runner around the bases. So we probably wouldn't call that coach interference on this type of play. And then lastly, third base coach is accidentally hit by a thrown ball when it's standing in the coach's box, foul territory or fair territory. I copied and pasted this is the wrong play. This is for further on down the page. So we'll actually see this again in a couple charts. Okay, so that's it for coach's interference. So hopefully you get a fairly good idea as to how that works. Remember, the key takeaway here is that it is a live ball. We declare the runner out. We keep the ball alive and allow play to continue through the end of the playing action, and then call time, and then go ahead and enforce the penalty. So now we transition to malicious contact, which is an interference call, but it's a special type of interference call. So you can have malicious contact by offensive personnel. Those are the folks who are at bat or running the bases, where they can create malicious contact with any fielder. A coach-player substitute shall not initiate malicious contact, so that can also affect the potential playing action. And the penalty for any type of malicious contact, as we will see in a couple videos, is that's going to be an immediate dead ball. And depending upon where the malicious contact occurs, it could occur before a player scores, or it could occur after a player has scored. And that is important because since we're going to kill the play, and if the play occurred prior to a scoring play, then we're not going to allow the score. If the play occurred after a scoring play, then we will go ahead and allow the score and enforce the penalty after the score has been allowed. And we're going to go through that in a couple charts from here. The key point for a malicious contact is that when it occurs, whether if it's on the offensive or on the defensive side of the ball is dead immediately. And if a runner initiates malicious contact, again, that's going to be a dead ball. But the one thing you all want to know is that when you have malicious contact, and oh, by the way, there is a obstruction component to the play, the malicious contact takes precedence over the obstruction. So if for whatever reason you have a runner who's rounding a base and he creates malicious contact on a fielder who was obstructing him, we're going to call the malicious contact. And the reason why this is in the rule book is it's all about safety. You know, the Federation and the various state components put a high emphasis on safety. And when you have malicious contact, that's pushing the envelope a little bit too far. Okay, so for the next couple of videos that we're going to take a look at, we're going to look at different kinds of malicious contact, or even in one particular play where you be the judge. So let's go ahead and go to our videos and take a look. Just as a prelude, in our first video, this is a video that we use to show runners' interference with a play at second base. And I just want to point out that you can have interference, like we'll see in a minute, on a play, particularly a double play, and not be malicious, or you could have malicious contact. So in our first
Greg, you muted yourself. I don't know if you intended to, but you're muted.
Don't see it anymore because the runner thinks he has to avoid he doesn't. If the guy's in the way, you're still able to hit him. I think we've just retrained the mind so much right there that they look to miss him. And I'd much prefer what Riz did tonight, and what he did was right, absolutely right. It's a good play. If the catcher's in the way, you don't try to avoid him in an effort to score.
Okay. Okay, so let's go through each of these plays that you saw and highlight some of the key takeaways for each particular play. As I indicated earlier, in clip number 1, where we have a runner who's illegally sliding into second base, that's an example of both an illegal slide and at the high school level, because high school puts a premium on safety, that's going to be a fairly easy call to call malicious contact. He's not attempting to touch the base. He's attempting to take out the defender, the fielder. So that's should be a fairly easy call for this type at the high school level to go ahead and call malicious contact. And when you have malicious contact, again, that's an immediate dead ball, and we're going to eject the offender. In our second example, I think this is also an obvious malicious call contact, again, at the high school level. If you take a look at our photo here, you have to ask yourself, is our runner attempting to score? Clearly he is not. Clearly he's attempting to go ahead and take out that catcher to dislodge that ball. So at the high school level, if you see this type of approach into home base, we're going to go ahead and get the malicious contact call. And again, we're going to eject the offender. Again, immediate dead ball and eject the defender. And as you can see, our runner is clearly putting his shoulder into the play. You know, that's something that we as umpires have to get at the high school level. In our clip 3 that we saw, that was actually a high school play. And as you can see here, maybe not as clear as clip 2, but I still think it would be a pretty good and pretty safe call to call malicious contact, because as you can see, our runner is putting his helmet head first into the catcher. And, you know, that kind of action is really a safety issue. He's not attempting to advance and touch home plate. So to be conservative, I think this is maybe not as clear as in clip 2, but in clip 3, I think that's a fairly obvious call for malicious contact at the high school level. So again, that's an immediate dead ball, and we're going to eject the offender, our runner. And oh, by the way, if this occurred prior to the offender touching home plate, then we're not going to allow the runner to score. If for whatever reason this had happened after he had touched home plate, then we allow the score, call time, immediate dead ball, and we're going to eject. In our last example for clip 4, you know, this one now gets a little bit harder. Do we have a legal slide? Well, it kind of is a legal slide. It looks like he's attempting to reach the base. It's not the most graceful slide, but it is to some degree a slide, and he's coming in. But note that he's not leaning in with the shoulder. He's not leaning in with the forearm. He's not leaning in with the helmet. This looks a little bit more like a protective mode by our runner. So again, for this one might be a little bit more of a judgment call. It's not necessarily malicious, so you're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not you think it is malicious or not. And if not, then you allow the play to continue, you make your call, and then you move on. So in some cases, it's clear whether it's runners around second base or any other base, or particularly at home plate. So hopefully these are fairly good examples of what looks like and what may not look like as malicious contact. So here we have a case play where we have a runner on third, runner on second, B4 hits down the left field line, R3 scores, but R2 maliciously runs over F5 after R3 has touched the plate. In this particular play, interference is because of the malicious contact, so the ball is going to be dead. R3 is going to count because he scored before the malicious contact. And then R2 is going to be called out, and because it's malicious contact, we're going to eject the runner from the game. And then if there are any other runners, like for us, the batter runner is going to return to the last legally touched base before the interference / malicious contact occurred. So if he had touched first, he stays at first. If for whatever reason the malicious contact occurred before our batter runner, after our batter runner had touched second, then he would be going back to second base. In our last case play, R3 is advancing to home and he initiates malicious contact with F2, who is standing out of the baseline. F2 does not have the ball and there's no play at the plate. This is going to be considered interference again, malicious contact. The ball is going to be dead at the time of the malicious contact occurring. R3 is going to be declared out because of the action. R3 is also going to be ejected again because of the action. And the runners are going to return to the last touch base at the time of the interference. And this is our last malicious contact. Most of the malicious contact more than likely will occur on the offensive side of the ball, but can it occur on the defensive side? Yes. We may not see it much, but it can still happen. So in our case play here, we have 2 outs, R2 on second base and R1 is on first. B5 hits the ball in the gap, R2 touches and rounds third. R1 touches and rounds second, as in our diagram, and B5 rounds and touches first. But at the time of the rounding, F3, for whatever reason, initiates malicious contact with B5 as there is a play developing back at third base. Before the tag, after the tag. So what do we rule? In A, where we have malicious contact before the tag, again, it's malicious contact, so the ball is going to be dead immediately. And in the umpire judgment, R2 scores, R1 is going to be awarded third base, and B5 is going to be awarded second base. And F3 is going to be ejected for malicious contact. In B, when it occurs after the tag, again, immediate dead ball, the out at third will be recorded, thus making R2 score a timing play. F3 is also going to be ejected for the malicious contact. Okay, so that's malicious contact. I didn't put in a question, which would be a break chart. I'm going to stop here and see if Norm or Tim, if we have any questions or if anyone has any comments before we move on to spectator interference.
Yeah, Greg, there are a number of questions that I will address as they came in. First one really goes back to our previous webinars, and it's a question that's on the Federation test. And actually, the people who took this test early and had this question did not see the same possible answers. The Federation fixed the answer. And the question is a pop-up near third with a runner on third, and that runner interferes with the third baseman's attempt to field the foul pop-up. In that situation, and the question says the batter has a 1-on-1 count when all this occurs. the initially they didn't have a correct answer in there, but now they amended one of the answers so that if obviously the runner on third is out for interference, since interference that interference is an immediate dead ball, the batter remains at bat with a 1-2 count. So the foul ball becomes his second strike. The next question was, well, it's just a clarification. Then the coach's interference on the home run or on the ball caught by the center fielder, the interference occurred before the catch. So the interference is the second out and the catch is the third out. That's pretty easy. Then there's a question, what if the runner is out for coach's interference, but the runner does not stop and draws a throw from the defense? Well, he's still out for interference. It's a delayed dead ball because the defense is allowed to continue and try to make another play. So I'm not sure what the question is, but the runner's out. Now he didn't stop running. Well, then you have to decide if that was a intentional act to deceive the defense or whether he just didn't realize he was out for running into the coach. If you think it's an intentional act to deceive the defense, then you can get another out. And I think there's one other question. Well, there's a question, could we see a legal slide that is also malicious contact? Not really. The definition of a legal slide has components where one buttocks on the ground, lead foot no higher than the knee, that sort of thing. I suppose maybe you could, but that's something you'd have to umpire the play to decide if a legal slide was also malicious. Pretty rare to have anything like that. That's where your judgment comes into play.
Yeah, I would agree.
Now the one video where the Cubs coach was doing the audio explaining that why Rizzo's slide was okay, blah 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 at the plate. Well, he didn't have a buttock on the ground, so technically it was no illegal slide. Whether it was malicious or not, that's something that each umpire will have to decide.
Okay, thank you, Norm.
There's one other. Let me take a look at it real quick. On the ejections, is it required for the head coach to be ejected as well as players? Because the players are minors, can't leave the premises of the field. No, you don't eject the coach. If a player commits malicious contact, he's ejected. He can stay on the bench if mom and dad aren't there to take him home or whatever, but he has to behave on the bench or you'll have subsequent penalties. Yeah, we don't, because they're, most of them are minors anyway, we don't banish them from sight and sound. They can stay in the dugout because we don't want to have them out roaming the streets because they get kicked out of a game. And that's all the questions.
All right, thank you, Norm. And again, just to go back real quick on Madden's comments, again, that's at the major league level. We're talking about high school. This is a safety thing. If you are in doubt, I would err on the side of conservatism, and if you believe it's malicious contact, then you go ahead and eject the player. Again, this is a player safety issue. Okay, spectator interference, not going to cover much about this because, again, most of our fields at the high school level, with the exception of maybe some of the private schools, are enclosed, so we really shouldn't have that issue. But for completeness purposes, it is in the rule book. Spectator interference is obviously when a spectator impedes the progress of the game, and that's going to be immediate dead ball. So again, not really going to go through this too much. Because we really shouldn't have a problem with this. spectator interference case play. I'll go ahead and put this up, but I'm really not going to address it because we really shouldn't see it in an enclosed field. So this is our second case play. Reaching into the stands, I think everyone would agree that at the high school level, these are 6-foot fences, so we really shouldn't see this. Again, at the private school level, you might. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about umpire interference. So we are on the field. We are part of the playing action. Obviously, we do not want to interfere with the playing action, but there are going to be times when that does occur, and if it does, then what happens? So here's where we're generally going to see us. We're either going to be in our normal U1 position, our A position with nobody on, and when there are runners are on base, we're either going to be in our B or C position. And then obviously with our plate umpire, we're at the plate. So these are plays where we potentially could get entangled in the play, either in our A, B, C, or plate positions. So this is where the action could occur. What is umpire interference? We inadvertently move and we may hinder the catcher's attempt to make a throw, or when a fair ball touches an umpire before it touches a fielder or passes a fielder. We also could interfere with a thrown ball, particularly when it lodges in umpire and or catcher's uniform. It's going to be a delayed dead ball when we interfere. Just like batter interference, we want to afford the defense the opportunity for a put out. So if we interfere with the catcher and there's an opportunity for that put out, we'll allow the play to continue. So let's go ahead and take a look at umpire interference around the plate. So here you see our photograph. We have our batter, we have our catcher, our umpire. We have a player who is stealing a base. The catcher comes up and unfortunately it hits our umpire. And now we have umpire interference. Here's another angle, not as good. Again, there's our interference. And again, it's going to be a delayed dead ball. We're going to allow the play to continue. And here's our rule, delayed dead ball rule as rule 151. When the catcher is attempting to throw, if the runner is not out, the runner is going to return. If the runner's out, then we disregard the interference. Here's a case play. Runner on third and first, double steal. R1 attempts to steal home. Umpire interferes with F2's throw to second base. It's a delayed dead ball. If R2 is not put out on F2's throw, the umpire will declare a dead ball and return runners to the base last occupied. We have a runner on first. R1 is on second base. Umpire inadvertently interferes with the catcher's throw back to F1, and R1 advances to third. So now we have a situation here where it's not an attempted steal, it's just a return back to the pitcher. So now we're going to use our judgment. Do we feel that in our judgment, our interference permitted R1 to reach third base safely? If so, we'll send R1 back to second base. If not, then we would allow the steal to third to remain in effect. So in some cases, we interfere with a put out. The out stands if it was successful. If the out was not successful, we're going to return the runner because we felt that our presence had interfered with the play. But again, in our second case play, if we feel that our presence did not affect that play, then we can allow the play to stand. There are times when it gets lodged in our uniform, and as this picture indicates, our pitch ball is lodged in our front pocket. So because it's lodged in our equipment, that's going to be an immediate dead ball. There you go. Award all runners 1 base. So this is as if the ball were thrown out of play. There's our rule. Each runner is awarded 1 base if a pitch or any throw lodges in either the catcher's equipment or, as in this case, maybe umpire equipment. Okay, there are times when we may unfortunately interfere with a fair batted ball. So there are a number of scenarios here. In our first scenario, R1 is on third, R2 is on first. Batted ball by B3 hits the umpire, who is in fair territory. So this is the precursor. It has to be a fair batted ball, fair territory behind F5 or behind the pitcher, but in front of F4. Because the batted ball was behind the pitcher in fair territory behind F5, it had passed a fielder. The ball is going to remain live, again, since it had passed a fielder. In our second scenario, it's behind the pitcher but in front of F4. Well, the rule states that it has to be, other than the pitcher, it has to pass behind a fielder. In this particular case, it did not. So unless the ball touches F1, it becomes dead, and each runner is sent to the base he occupied, to which he was being forced when the ball became dead. And in our example, R1 will remain at third, and R2 and B3 will go to second and first. So the key here is, in order for the ball to remain live, it has to pass a fielder. Then it hits us. If it hits us first, prior to passing a fielder, then that's going to be umpire interference, with the exception that if it hits the pitcher, carooms off the pitcher and hits us, then that's going to be a live ball, just as in our A scenario. So here are a couple plays where we have a batted ball, it hits our base umpire. Normally in a two-man system, we're going to be in the B position. This is B mod at the pro level, but for the most part, it's kind of similar to what we are in B at the high school level, where you have batted ball hits our umpire. So as you can see, U1 is in the so-called B position. The ball had passed the pitcher, but it didn't meet the requirement of passing the fielder, and it didn't hit the pitcher, but it did hit the umpire. So by rule, a fair batted ball touches an umpire before touching any fielder, before passing any fielder other than the pitcher. It's going to be an immediate dead ball, and the batter runner in this particular case would be awarded first base. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple videos. The first two clips are going to be umpire interference at the plate. Clips 3 through 6 are going to be examples of umpire interference at the bases. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
There goes Siriaco, no chance. Now they're going to call a balk, or what? Not a balk, but
This one back up the middle, that hits the second. This baseball was hit extremely well too, again by Calhoun.
Left Up the middle, it smokes the umpire.
Okay, let's go back to our charts. Okay, so let's just take a quick review of these. So when we behind the plate interfere with the catcher, you know, that's a catch-22 because we like, some of us, particularly me, I like to work close to get a good view of that strike zone. So I run the risk of potentially interfering with the catcher when he makes an attempt on any base runners on base. How do you avoid that? One of the things that I do is I do some pre-pitch planning. When I know there are runners on base and I know that I am close to the catcher and there's a possible steal or a back pick, I've heightened my senses to make sure that my mechanics of getting out and not interfering with the catcher are a little bit quicker once the pitch has taken place, so that I give the catcher a unimpeded opportunity to take a runner out at any of the bases. Don't work too close, don't work too low. Again, you can do those things and reduce the risk of umpire interference at the plate, but then you may sacrifice some of the good views that you might want when calling balls and strikes for 7 or 9 innings. So I leave it up to you. It's a feel, and it's just something that you're just going to have to pay attention to, particularly when there are runners on base. Out on the field, most of the time this is going to occur when our umpires are in a two-man system. We're either going to be in the B or the C position. And again, if it doesn't touch the pitcher or doesn't pass an infielder, then we have an immediate dead ball. We're going to award the batter runner first base. Runners are going to return or they will advance, but they will only advance if they are forced by the batter runner who is awarded to first base. And the only thing else I could say is when you see that ball coming at you, try and make a conscientious decision as to which direction you want to move. Read the flight of the ball, read whether the ball is coming straight or if it's tailing off. And if it's tailing off, try and take a step in the direction opposite of the tail off. So these are the risks that we run when we're in our positions on the inside of the field. Okay, so that's kind of umpire interference. Let me stop and see if there are any questions, and then we're going to move on to a fairly interesting topic, I think, about interfering umpire, which is not umpire interference. So I'll turn it over to Norm and Tim to see if you guys have any questions or comments.
There were no questions on that segment.
All right, great. Okay, interfering umpiring. What is that? Interfering umpire is when an umpire interferes or alters with some part of the play without penalty, as we just discussed in some of the umpire interference, or cause for immediate stoppage of play. So when we talk about umpire interference, we're talking about this rule set where we hinder the catcher, you know, or we are involved in a fair batted ball. So there are prescribed rules that talk about stoppage, and there are prescribed rules that talk about what you enforce for umpire interference. But for an interfering umpire, what are the rules? Well, the rules are all those things that are not umpire interference. So umpire interference, again, is specifically those things that are identified in the rule book. So when it's not in the rule book, then you potentially could be in a situation where you are an interfering umpire. Whether if it's a catcher's throw or whether if it's a throw by any other fielder, then we potentially could be in an interfering umpire situation. And we have a few examples of that we're going to take a look at. So again, to differentiate between the two, to our left, umpire interference could occur with a fair batted ball, which we've seen, a throw, a lodged ball, but not necessarily impeding a runner where we have contact or alter his path. We generally don't have a rule for umpire interference for that, but we do for interfering umpire, which we'll talk in a second. In those cases where we interfere, it's going to be immediate dead ball, and we're going to be awarding some kind of basis. And as an interfering umpire, that could occur when we have a fair batted ball, just like for umpire interference. Well, what's the difference between the two? And we'll talk about that. We could have an interfering umpire with a throw, just like umpire interference, and we'll talk about the difference that. We can't have an interfering umpire with a lodged ball. That's going to be umpire interference, and again, the prescribed rule is an immediate dead ball. But we can impede the progress of a runner, and that be interfering umpire, which doesn't really exist under umpire interference. So here's our example for a fair batted ball which passed a fielder, in this particular case, F3, our first baseman. It hits our umpire, and the ball is deflected. Well, even though it hit the umpire, it met that crucial test of passing the fielder, so it's going to be a live ball, and we're going to play on. So let's go ahead and look at this case play. We'll start with interfering umpire with the catcher's throw. We have a drop third strike. We've all been there, done that. Catcher moves to pick up the ball and throw it to the first baseman. Our umpire, our plate umpire, wanting to get a good position to see the action better, inadvertently interferes with the catcher's throw, which sails into the outfield. And the batter runner advances to second, might even advance to third. So what do we rule? It is only umpire interference if the act specifically identified as umpire interference in the rule book. So this is not one of those situations which is covered by the rule. So umpire interference, when we hinder, impede, or prevent a catcher's throw attempting to prevent a stolen base or retire a runner on a pickoff play, yes, but that's not this. Any other occasion where the umpire hinders the play is to be considered incidental contact. So that's the key here. The purpose of the rule is to allow us as umpires to remain in our position to call balls and strikes. And if during the course of calling balls and strikes, we interfere with a play, like a steal play, we interfere with the catcher, then that's going to be umpire interference. But when we're not calling balls and strikes, and that responsibility is over, and we now have subsequent playing action, that is when there is a potential for us to be interfering umpires. And depending upon the play, for the most part, that play will stand. So here's a scenario where you have an interfering umpire who is, it's a rotation play. It doesn't matter whether if it's 2-man, 3-man, or 4-man. Our plate umpire is rotating up to third. We have a runner rounding third and coming home. And as you can see, we are interfering with the runner's opportunity to advance to home plate. Here's another angle. And as a result of that, you could argue that if we weren't there, that runner would have taken a different path to home plate. But in this particular case, because we are where we are, we may have altered the runner's path to the plate. And as a result, in this play, the ball comes in, it's caught by the catcher. We now have an out at the plate, and guess what? The out will stand because it's an interfering umpire situation rather than umpire interference. So by rule, we play on. The results and or consequence of the play is going to stand, and we may be prepared to have a conversation with the head coach if the head coach comes out. So let me go ahead and show this play. And bear with me for a second. We got to go to a particular spot. Okay, we're going to have to unfortunately skip the video that I uploaded onto the webinar because it doesn't allow me to slide forward. So I'm going to go ahead and play this version. It's going to come across as choppy, but hopefully you'll get a pretty good idea as to what the play looks like. Okay, so you saw the key elements of that play. So again, that's a good example of interfering umpire by our plate umpire who's rotating up to third. More examples where we could interfering umpire is with base runners. So here we have an example. We have a runner who is rounded first and is on his way to second because of a potential double. And as you can see, we have contact. In this particular case, it's contact versus altering the runner's path with our first base umpire. And unfortunately, in this play, our runner is called out at second base. And now we have Joe Madden who's coming out wanting to talk to the umpire to find out what the heck happened on that play. Again, this is not umpire interference. It's us interfering with the runner, and that out is going to stand at second base. Here's another example. Again, our runner is rounding first on his way to second, and we as umpires are coming in to take the play. This was actually an overthrow, and we have contact. That's Angel Hernandez. Again, the ball is going to remain live, and we're going to allow the playing action to continue until all play has ceased. Our third example of an interfering umpire is with a fielder's throw. This ball was hit in the box around the pitcher's mound. The pitcher picks it up. He's going to throw out R1 at second base, but unfortunately, our middle infield umpire, for those of us in a two-man system, we'd be in the B spot, is now caught in the throwing lane, and the ball hits him. So this is, again, not an example of interfering umpire interference. It's an example of an interfering umpire where we're now interfering with the fielder's throw in making a play. So let's go ahead and take a look at all three of these clips and see the video on that. Okay.
2-2, ground ball down to third, comes up on Freese, he recovers and a wide throw. Zobrist has scored, Joyce will score, Longoria tripped, and now the throw back down to second. Longoria collided with the first base umpire, and down he went. Joe Madden wants to have a conversation about that. Take a look at this. Here it is.
Well, the ball is wide of Pujols. When Evan realizes it gets by him, he starts to turn up. Larry Vanover, not sure where the ball is, and they collide. Down goes Evan. That buys the Angels time. They get the ball, they throw in. Evan coming into second, and he's tagged out right there.
Signed by the Cardinals as a free agent in November. He makes the play here, but then throws it away by the first baseman. Hamilton slipped and fell coming around to first base. Oh, he ran into the umpire. All right, he ran into the first base umpire, Angel Hernandez.
Well, if you run into a player on the field, it's called obstruction, and you're given the next base. If you run into an umpire, it's like running into I guess, a blade of grass.
Yeah, the umpires are considered part of the field. You can hear the fans booing down below, but I mean, Angel Hernandez, he was trying to figure out a way to get out of the way of Billy Hamilton. Huge break for the Cardinals.
Chopper. Mashi throws to. Oh! Hits McCutcheon! Threw the ball to second, or the umpire. The umpire on the shoulder.
Okay, so let's take a look at the first two clips. When does this occur in a two-man system? This is usually going to occur where we may interfere with a runner when we are U1 in the A position. Responsibilities may delay our typical inside move on any type of base hit because we have to make on a ground ball to the infield, we have to get into a position to make a safe out call. Then if there's overthrow, we have overthrow coverage that we may have to judge. We may have to look for possible obstruction. We may have to look for the attempted batter runner's potential advance to second, whether if he feint to second or second or not. And then you have the actual advance. And we have to do all of that, and the runner is still moving. So as a result, we may get a late start to busting in and pivoting and then taking any potential batter runner into second. So as a result of all of that, that may cause us to potentially interfere like the examples that we have. But again, for an interfering umpire, the ball is going to remain live and the players are going to advance at their own risk. In clip 1, our runner advanced to second, was called out. The out will stand. In clip 2, our runner was smart enough to know to return to first base, and he remained at first base, so he was safe. In our third clip, usually this is going to occur when we may have our umpires in the B or the C position, and we somehow inadvertently get trapped into the throwing lane, and we take one in the chest like our umpire did in our video. So in all three examples, the ball is going to remain live. Players are going to advance or remain at their base as they see fit. So good stuff. So here's a case play for us interfering during a throw. B1 hits a ground ball to left field. F7 throws the ball to the infield where it hits an umpire or a base runner. The ball is dead. Let's just ignore the base runner component of this. That's going to be a live ball. The ball is going to remain in play because it's a throw. It hits the umpire, and you just play on just like we did in our last clip. Okay, I think that's it for tonight. Let's take a look at our time. Apologize, we're a few minutes late. So let me go ahead and turn it over to those guys and see if there are any questions. And then we'll go through the review, and then we'll let you go for the night. Norm, Tim?
Yes, there's a couple questions, and they're not directly related to what we've covered, but they are situations that might occur when you're umpiring that might make you think we have interference. The first one is catcher's throwing a ball back to the pitcher after a pitch with a runner on first. Ball hits the bat, being held legally by the batter, and rolls away, allowing the runner on first to go to second. What is the ruling? And second part of the question, what if the ball bounces off the bat and goes out of play? Well, the catcher has the responsibility of knowing that there's a batter standing in the batter's box. And if that batter doesn't make an overt move to get in the way of his throw back to the pitcher, basically we have nothing. If the ball were to bounce off that bat and go out of play, now we have to award bases. But it's not interference unless that batter does something to intentionally get in the way of that throw back to the pitcher. Catcher is responsible for knowing there's a guy standing there and that he has to throw it back to the pitcher in some manner that doesn't hit the guy. Next question. Why would a rule ever say that an umpire inadvertently interferes? Unlike players, there's no situation in which an umpire would intentionally interfere. Well, I think it says inadvertently interferes to differentiate between plays where we have to take responsibility for the interference by an umpire and move runners back and stop play, and to differentiate between those plays where play continues when a ball hits an umpire. So the verbiage may not be entirely appropriate, but it's to make sure we can distinguish between those two situations. The last one,
This is what Greg has emphasized. The choice
Absolutely.
of words should be interfering umpire,
Right.
just poorly written.
So the last one, there's a runner on second, asks the field umpire the number of outs. Umpire tells 2 outs, and there's only actually 1 out. Next guy hits a fly ball to center field, easy fly. Runner takes off, assuming 2 outs. Ball's caught, thrown to second to double the runner off. Does the team at bat have any recourse since the umpire gave them the wrong number of outs? No, they don't. They're supposed to know how many outs there are. As umpires, we don't want to do that, obviously, but the players on the field have a responsibility to know what the situation is at all times. So if you're not sure how many outs, either ignore them or say, I'm not sure, or ask your partner real quick.
And Norm, you could also, there's another example for an infield fly. If you have an infield fly situation and you don't call it, it is the responsibility of the teams to understand the infield fly situation or not, whether if you call it or inadvertently call it.
Yep, absolutely. That's just like a guy swings and misses at a pitch, and if you don't say strike, it's still a strike. That's all the questions.
Okay, thank you, Norm. Before I turn it over to Tim, so here's our schedule. We finally covered all of the interferences, part 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully